Hi there, welcome to Memorial University's Botanical Garden. I'm Deborah Coombs, the marketing advisor here at the garden and our sister site, the Johnson Geocenter. We're so happy to give you a little tour of our greenhouse today with our nursery manager and horticulturalist, Tim Walsh. Of course, we're filming this now on the last day of February, so we're covered in snow and there's not a whole lot to see down in our actual cultivated gardens. So we think the greenhouse will be a nice sneak peek because the public doesn't usually get to go in there. It is our research, our development space, and where we prepare materials, plant materials for our own garden displays. The Botanical Garden itself has been open to the public since 1977. We are proud to be a part of Memorial University, and we do work to support the education and research activities of the university. And you see a little bit of that in the tour with Tim. We are located on a 110-acre property in the boreal forest throughout and around Oxen Pond. So we have a few different habitats here for a variety of wildlife and wild plants and trees. We also have a beautiful cultivated garden area. So there's sort of two pieces to the garden. We have a cultivated garden with our greenhouse, vegetable garden, rock gardens, alpine house, etc. And that showcases both heritage local plants that are native to Newfoundland and Labrador, and exotics and imported plants that do well here in our ecosystem and our climate. When you've seen that, you can also do, again, our walking trails. You can go to our walking trails. We have 5 walking trails which through the boreal forest and around Oxen Pond that are about 3.5 kilometers worth of walking. Fabulous array of habitats and environments, as I said, insect life, fungi, birds, wildflowers, different tree varieties. It's a beautiful, safe place to walk in the middle of the city, really. We're right here on Mount Sire Road, so we're easy to get to. And we do hope that you will come and visit us this coming season.
Hi, my name is Tim Walsh, and I'm the nursery manager and horticulturist here at the Munn Botanical Garden Nursery. I'm really happy that you can join us today, and I can take you on a tour in the nursery in the middle of, well, it's almost March now, so in the middle of winter. We can kind of get a sense of what a greenhouse looks like, what the plants look like out in the greenhouse. And I'll tell you a little bit along the way about just what we do as a botanical garden nursery. We're a little bit different than a regular home nursery because we don't necessarily cater to all the needs of all the gardeners, but we have a botanical garden, and so everything that grows here in the nursery makes its way over to the botanical garden for the displays. Plus we also do lots of research along the way. We have students and various other researchers that come and use the greenhouse in the nursery in order to do plant-based experiments. One of the other things that I do as well is I grow plants for the biology department, especially this time of year when all the classes are happening on campus and all the labs are quite active this time of year. I'm growing plants for that, so I get lists from various different classes, and they say, well, I need pea plants for this date, and I need them to be this size, and this is how many I need. And so I get these great lists at the end of each semester to prepare for the next semester. In fact, I'll show you some right now. Just right here, I've got some oat seeds that are heading on down to the botany lab on campus this morning, where the students are actually going to be taking these tiny little oat seeds that have just been germinated. And I can take one up here to show you the root system on there. So they'll explore the root system on the little oat. You can see the leaf just about to start here. And they also look at various different things about how plants grow. So right now, for instance, in these boxes, we've got oats and radish in here, and it's lit from one side. And that's going to show how the plants will lean towards the light. So they'll actually reach out looking for that light because they know that's the direction that it's coming from. So you tend to see a bend in the plants as they make their way out. These here have oats and radishes in completely dark boxes. So what's going to happen in there is those plants are going to be looking for light in all directions. So they're not going to grow in any one direction. They're going to grow a little bit sort of wiry and spindly, and they're going to stretch out. They're going to really desperately trying to find that light. And what happens is, of course, they lose all their chlorophyll, so they don't have that green color anymore because they can't photosynthesize, and the stems get very weak and they're not able to even support themselves, so sometimes they fall over. So it's a real interesting example of how plants respond just simply to light. Of course, plants respond to soil, and plants respond to fertilizer, and they respond to heat, temperature changes, that sort of thing. But this one is, this particular week in the lab, this is what the students are looking at. So I'm standing actually now in the header house of the greenhouse. So it's a very common building with most nurseries. It's at the head of the greenhouse, and the greenhouses are out here, and we're going to go out there now in a second. And it's basically where all the work happens. So you think of a greenhouse, even a working greenhouse, you don't actually do the work in the greenhouse. The work all happens in a different space, usually in a header house. On this bench is here, and you can see underneath there are tubs down at the bottom with various different ingredients in them. And so depending on what we're working in, I will make up a recipe, just like you would at home if you're making a recipe in your kitchen. You would take different ingredients and put them up on the bench in this case, mix them up, because if I'm growing, let's say, a marigold or a petunia, one of those common sort of garden plants, that's going to take a different soil than if I'm growing cactus, for instance, which is very well drained, very sandy, very loose soil. And so you'll make up that mix based on that. And then all the work gets done. I'm actually doing a lot of seeding right now. So I just got in the mail lots and lots of seeds. So packages and packages and packages of wonderful seeds here, all ready for the 2022 gardening year. All that's going to be happening pretty soon because it is March tomorrow, and we'll be kicking in with that and planning the new gardening season and the displays at the Botanical Garden. So once all the work happens here in the greenhouse, then the plants go out into the, in the header house, the plants go out into the greenhouse. And that's where they just sit and do what they're supposed to do. You know, we've done all the work here, we bring them out there, we put them out in the nice bright light, and then they hopefully will do exactly what we want them to do. So let's go and have a look at that now. So as you can see, lots and lots of green. It's certainly living up to its name. The greenhouse in winter is a little bit different than the greenhouse in summer. In fact, the greenhouse in summer is empty, pretty much. The greenhouse in winter is preparing all of these plants for the next season. And so right now, we have quite a collection of what are more commonly referred to as houseplants, really. And it's not something that we always grow a lot of, but because we've had 2 years of COVID now, we haven't been able to run our regular classes where we teach people how to grow dish gardens and terrariums and things like that. So as a result of that, we have a fairly large, beautiful collection right now. So if we look through, you'll see quite a lot of various different succulents and cactus. We've got some pea plants here. This is for biology department. You can see the peas, just pea flowers just starting right now. And if I look close, I may even, there we go, we can actually see a pea even just forming right there. So the students look at how obviously plants produce seed, and in this case, we would call that a vegetable, but it's actually seed, and you can even see little bumps there where the little peas are forming inside. There's, again, a wide variety of succulents, and succulents are kind of related, very much related to cactus in that they grow in very arid conditions. So they grow in dry areas, probably not as dry as cactus. All right, and continuing with our tour, here we have this incredible plant up here. It's in the succulent family, and it's called a burro's tail or donkey's tail. And you can see why, because of these long tail-like branches that kind of hang down and have these little fleshy little leaves here. And what's interesting about this plant is that, like all the succulents, where they grow in drier environments, very dry environments, it's almost like cactus, but not as dry as cactus. When it rains, the plants absorb a lot of moisture into those fleshy leaves. And so they're very succulent, very fleshy leaves with lots of moisture stored inside. And that then gives the plant an opportunity to go for a long period of time without rain, because then it used the reserves of moisture that's in those leaves to survive. And what's cool about this plant, as with a lot of these succulents, is that oftentimes leaves will fall off very easily, and these brush off very easily. Maybe if in the wild, if an animal was brushing by it and rubbed against it, and it falls to the ground, and it roots incredibly easy. In fact, we've got some a little further down here that are a little bit smaller. You can see right here, and this is one that I've grown from a tiny little leaf like that. So it's amazing to think that something like this, and even this one was actually grown from a tiny leaf as well. So that's kind of how I propagate a lot of these succulent plants, because they do grow so well from pieces of leaves. Even these larger ones down here, like these echeverias, I would just take a leaf like that and let it dry off a little bit first on the end of the leaf, let it kind of callus over. And then we just sit that on some fresh soil and just press that end into the soil and just walk away from it. And then within a few weeks, you start to see little baby leaves starting to form around the edge of that leaf. The same with this one here. So we just press that into the soil, and we'll end up with brand new plants in a short time. So it's a lot of fun. So if we walk down through the greenhouse, we'll see all kinds of different colors of succulent leaves, and these plants are not really producing a huge amount of flowers, and that's kind of not why we grow them really. We grow them because of the variety of the leaves and the colors and the textures. And even if you look closely at these here, you'll see just in this bunch here, we've got these leaves here, which have got that nice kind of scalloping curl in the leaf. And then this one here, which is that beautiful little rosette of foliage here with those pink edges. This one here, it's a little more spiky. It looks like the hanging one that we just talked about, the burro's tail, but it's not. And it grows a little more upright. But it's got this really neat pattern on the leaf when you look close, that kind of silver and green, that little veining that creates some really nice little kind of mottling effect there. Quite a lot of variety. And these beautiful, nice, almost pink leaves on this echeveria right here. And so all of these grow incredibly well when you plant them together, and that's why these plants are becoming very popular. And as I look down here right now, actually I see a leaf that's fallen off and just sitting on the bench. And when we look closer at that leaf, you can see how roots are already forming. And that's just sitting on the bench. No soil at all. So I'm just gonna help that one into some soil there. Hopefully in a little while we get a new plant. So if we make our way a little further down, oh, we got an interesting group of plants coming up here on this side. And even before we get to that, you can see even more of those little burro's tails that have just rooted. So these are tiny little babies just starting from those little leaves. And you can see how some of them have advanced a little bit further along. And you've got the tail starting on this one right here. So it's a lot of, these are just such fun plants to grow because there's just so much variety in them. And speaking of variety, we'll go from these really dry environments to this incredible group of plants right here. And these are plants called, the genus is Tillandsia, and they're commonly called air plants because they seemingly grow up in the air. They don't grow in the air just hanging, floating in the air, but they actually grow in tree canopies. And these are tropical plants. So these are plants that you would see in tropical jungles in South America and even as far north as Florida. And there's a good example right there. And this is a piece of wood. And these plants actually in the wild, the seeds fall in places like that in kind of crotches in the branch. And they don't really require huge amounts of soil like a lot of plants do. These actually just need an anchor. So they produce enough roots to anchor themselves onto the tree. And if you look right there, you can see the roots just snaking their way up this piece of wood here. And that's how it attaches itself to the tree canopy. And then it gets everything it needs from the air, which is the humidity in the canopy. It's not up in the top of the trees because that would be too sunny. It's actually down inside the protection of the jungle canopy. And so it's very humid in the jungle. And so they get all of the humidity and moisture that they need from that humid jungle. And they do get some nutrients, but they don't really need a whole lot, but they do get some from the decaying organic matter in the bark itself. So there's a huge interest in these plants, and we've been growing quite a few of them at the Botanical Garden. Here's another beautiful display here of a wide variety of different Tillandsias, and this one's putting on a big bloom here, and this one here is actually putting on its bloom, not as big, but the fact that it's blooming is a really good sign. So it's a really good fun plant, a group of plants to grow. We actually teach courses on how to grow those plants at home, and people come to a workshop and they get to take 2 or 3 of these little Tillandsias and attach it to a smaller piece of wood, maybe like something like this one here, although this one's a little mature right now. And they get to actually do that in the workshop and then take the whole thing home with them. So it's a real fun group of plants to work with. As we're making our way down, you'll see a lot of plants that I'm still propagating, still growing. You'll see little seedlings, little tiny little plants just starting right here. Here we've got a little tomato plant actually just starting right now. So this is actually going to be grown for the summer. And this is a cherry tomato. It's a variety called Tiny Tim, which produces smallish little loony or toony size diameter, incredibly sweet tomatoes. And these will be, this tiny little plant here has the potential to grow hundreds of tomatoes into the middle of the summer. So it's a really great, and that's one of those nice and easy ones to grow. This is corn. And you might think, well, why are you growing corn in a greenhouse in Newfoundland in March and April? And the reason being that I grow plants in this greenhouse for the botany labs and campus. So these are study plants. So the students actually get to take these plants down to a lab on campus, and they look at various different inner structures of plants, features like the corn plant that give it the strength to grow an incredibly tall plant, because as we know, corn can grow 6-7 feet high even. And they've got these really, it's starting to demonstrate now a little bit what the students look at, but they've got these anchoring roots, and you can see one here. And they put out sort of anchoring roots in all directions, and that's kind of what helps the corn plant be able to stand up so tall and be a strong plant that it is, and then produce those big ears, and you can imagine the weight of those ears. So that's the reason why those plants are able to do that. I showed you some tomatoes earlier, and here's a whole seedling tray of little baby Tiny Tim tomatoes. And so this weekend coming up, we're having a little seed exchange at the Botanical Garden, and it's all about teaching people how to grow plants from seed. And so the fun part of this event is that we're also going to have a kids table, and the kids will actually be able to come in here and take out a little collection of these plants like we've got here, and then they'll be able to separate their own plant and take one of these individual tomato plants and put it into their own pot and take it home with them. So it's a lot of fun for the kids. It's a really good education thing, and it kind of helps sometimes to really get kids started on growing plants for themselves. And we always felt that when you expose children to these types of things when they're younger, yeah, they may go away from it when they're teenagers, like all kids do, tend to lose interest in a lot of things when they're teenagers, but they do tend to come back to it as adults. So it's really important to introduce them to that at a young age. We'll do a complete switch now over to insectivorous plants. And of course, this one is a pitcher plant. This is not our native pitcher plant, but it is related to it. And you can see obviously how similar they are. And of course, the pitcher plant is an insectivorous plant. It has the ability to consume insects. And so it doesn't eat them like in the conventional way, in the way that we eat food. Pitcher plants grow in bogs, and bogs are very nutrient poor. There's not a lot of nutrition in the bog. So the plants that are growing in the bogs have adapted to different ways of getting the nutrition that they need. And with pitcher plants, they've actually done it by developing this pitcher. That's where it gets its name. It actually has a pitcher, and that pitcher, in this case it's a leaf, that leaf over time when it rains fills up with water, and it creates a kind of a very strong smell, shall we say. If you've ever on the bog and you put your nose down into a pitcher plant, it's not a real pretty smell, but it does what it's supposed to do, and that is to attract insects. And so insects fly into this pitcher, and they make their way down into the pitcher because of the smell. And what's difficult to see right now is that there are hairs all along those leaves, and those hairs are pointing downwards. And that makes it difficult when the insect decides, oh, I don't want to go in here, I want to get out. It makes it difficult for them to get out because those hairs are pointing downwards. And eventually the insect tires and it falls into the pitcher, which is filled with water. And the water also has some digestive enzymes in there. And those help to break down the body of the insect. And then the plant then absorbs those nutrients into its root system. So I think it's pretty fantastic. This one is actually coming into bloom right now, which is another way that the plant actually helps to reproduce itself, like all plants do. And this will get pollinated and produce seeds and drop seeds, and then you'll end up with more plants a little further along. Another interesting insectivorous plant that we have in Newfoundland, this is not the Newfoundland version of it, but we do have a Newfoundland sundew, and that's what this is. And it's also an insectivorous plant. And what's cool about this one
is that it actually has these really sticky leaves that have got this kind of real gelatinous little bulbs. If you look really super close, you can get to see on this leaf right here, for instance, those tiny little hairs with this goop on it, and there's smells there that we kind of don't really get, but it attracts insects. And when an insect comes close, it touches the leaf, and then you can see how that goo is sticking to my finger. Look at that, amazing. And so the insect can't get away, and it struggles and struggles. Eventually it dies, and the same thing. It actually, then there are enzymes on that leaf that break down that body and absorb those nutrients into the leaf. So it's really fantastic that plants have this adaptation, this way to adapt to their environment. I mean, we talked about the cactus plants and the succulents that have adapted to incredibly dry environments. And now we're looking at these plants that have adapted to incredibly wet and nutrient-poor environments. So, you know, it's fantastic that that plants have that ability. And we sometimes don't think of plants as being able to, as being that complicated. We just kind of see the surface and we're attracted to the leaves or the flowers. But really, there's a lot going on down there sometimes. Now, as we make our way along here, we've got a lot of brand new propagated, in this case, little garden shrubs. This is a Chamaecyparis, a little type of cedar, and you can see this is a really nice kind of silvery edged cedar. And so we actually took a cutting of that back in probably October of last year and rooted that into a brand new plant. And so a lot of the plants start off like we've got here. These little rhododendrons, and so this is a multi-tray, and there's probably about 35 or 40 of individual little cells there. And now that these plants have rooted, and you can even see all this here is new growth popping up here. We'll pop that out of that pot this time of year and put it into its own starter pot, similarly to what we've done here with this cedar. And so when I talk about, we're in, of course, a nursery. And when I talk to people about nurseries, I always like people to think about that whole nursery connection to people, for instance. And so how when people are born, when we're babies, we're in a nursery, and as we grow, we get a bigger bed, and we maybe get a different room, and we get different food as we grow, and then we might get another bigger bed again. And eventually we move out into the big world. And it's kind of the same thing with plants. Plants start off as little seedlings, and when they're younger, they need everything that they need is given to them by the nursery person, by the nurseryman in my case. And so these plants cannot survive without me because I give them the water, the food, the heat, the light that they need. And as they grow, they get into a new pot. As they grow bigger, then of course this is a garden shrub, so that's going to need a larger pot again. And eventually, when the summer comes, it's leaving the greenhouse and it's ready to leave the nest and kind of go out into the big world. So it goes out into the garden. And so that's kind of the transition as we move along. And so you can see quite a lot of plants as we go along here. A lot of them have already come from their initial seeding or cutting tray, and they've moved into their first step, their first new pot. They're starting to get a little bigger now. I've changed the feeding regime for these now, so they're actually getting a different fertilizer than when they were just starting to root. I'm focusing now on growth, where before I was focusing on rooting. And so now these plants, you can see they're putting on lots of new growth. And probably another month or so, they'll go into even a larger pot with different soil and preparing them to move outdoors for the summer season. So we're moving again along, and we've got even some more succulents. Up here we've got some cactus, and this is a variety pack of cactus seed that I purchased locally at the seed company downtown, the Gay Seed Company. And even within a packet of seeds, you can see variety in the plants. And even in these two plants here, there's little subtle differences, especially in the needles. These needles are a little bit turned at the end, a little bit hooky. You can even hear that, how sturdy those needles are. And that's all about protection from predators, and also protection from the sun's heat in the deserts where these plants come from. So it's always fun to kind of grow these. And we have another greenhouse down in the botanical garden, in the public display side of the garden, where we bring these plants from time to time and exchange them out. So that's kind of why we have all those plants here in the nursery. You can see here we've got some more of those tillandsias or those air plants, and this is how we get them. So we get them and they're quite small. And you can see this one's quite healthy. Doesn't even have a whole lot of roots yet, just starting there now. And these plants are here because these are going to be the plants that are used in our classes coming up later in the year. This one here is actually starting to produce a flower, even just sitting there. So it's pretty, you can see why they're called air plants, because when you look at them now you think, well, sure, they're growing without any kind of soil. In this case, they're just sitting on the bench. One of the things that I do with these on a regular basis is when I'm watering all the rest of the plants, I'll just come over and just hose them down very quickly and just coat them in water. And that helps to kind of give them that environment, environmental conditions that they're used to in their native habitat. A lot of the plants along this section here are actually orchids from various different tropical areas around the world. Not a lot of flowers this time of year, but that's okay, and we propagate these, so once they've finished flowering, we divide them and put them into their own pot, and that kind of slows down the flowering period for now. But as these plants mature, they will be displayed in the botanical garden as well. More tillandsias right here, much bigger one, you can see there. This one's getting quite large, and you can even see some of the roots on that one. Really interesting plant here, this called a rabbit's foot fern. And if you look at it here, it's got this beautiful display of these lovely fern leaves. And what's interesting about this plant is that in its native habitat, it grows on the forest floor. And so all of these leaves or these fronds you would see looking down, but underneath that are these roots. Basically, it's a rhizome, this really hairy kind of, that's why it gets the rabbit foot name. And this really hairy root that grows along and snakes itself along the forest floor, and then it produces these leaves. What's interesting with this one, I've had it for such a long time that the pot is not even visible. Oh, there's the pot right there. And if you look even underneath, it's actually just completely covered in these roots. So it's really interesting how, despite that, we always talk about making sure that your plants are not pot bound. In this case, it didn't care. It didn't even need the pot other than just to hold it in place. It's actually growing outside the pot. So I imagine if this, can you imagine if these roots were actually reaching soil, how well this plant would grow. But this is not a hardy plant for Newfoundland. This is more of an indoor plant for us. That's why we keep this in a pot and not have it out in the garden. And then we're coming finally to the last few plants that we've got here. And these are Streptocarpus or Cape Primrose. And they're actually related to African violets, and you can see the variety in them. You can almost kind of see how this kind of looks like an African violet leaf or flower. And these are propagated from leaves, and I'll just grab very quickly a tray that I've got here. These plants produce seed as well, but you can even propagate them from a leaf. So what I did here, I took one of these leaves and I laid it horizontally in a tray, and you can see sort of a little bit of the original leaf down here. So there's the original leaf down here laid horizontally in that tray, and then up pops all these brand new baby plants. So it's a really fun way to propagate your plants from a leaf cutting. And if you look inside, you really see like all of the tiniest little plants in here. And so all of these are going to be cut out separately with just a sharp blade and separate them into individual plants. Then they get their own pot. And then I start to replace some of the ones here that are in the worst shape with some brand new babies to replace them for the year. And then we'll finish off just right here again with more of these tillandsias. We have so many of them, but you can see here how we're growing them almost like you would see them in the wild, sort of hanging up on, this particular case, a lattice. But this is how they grow in nature. They hang themselves up in the trees. And we saw this one earlier down here, but there's a version of it here where we've planted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those individual plants, and they're looking quite amazing right now, all producing flowers. This really very large tillandsia right here, it's been with me now for several years, and really liking this situation because they get a really nice wetting down every time I'm watering. Got a little bit of shade in here too to kind of mimic the tropical jungle canopy. So that's why these plants are doing as well as they are. So that concludes my tour of the Botanical Garden Nursery. I'm so glad that you're interested in the work that we're doing here.
The Botanical Garden is open May 1st until the end of November, and then from end of November until Christmas, we run a Christmas light show. So we're really open until the end of December. We'd love to see you come by. Check us out online for all kinds of visitor information, and I hope you have a great year. Thank you.